We have a chance to now sit down and all of you will have a chance to engage with one of our greatest leaders of our current time, a man who has led tremendous growth in this country and is an advocate for gender equality, environmental conservation, innovation, and prosperity on this continent. His Excellency, Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda. Please join me on stage. President Kagame, thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation with us today. I know all the young people in the audience and our viewers on YouTube and members of the room who are joining us from around the world. Some people are in the US at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. and very excited to be in this conversation with you. When I asked you to have this conversation, you graciously agreed, but on one condition. You said that you wanted me to come to Rwanda and to have this conversation with a group of young people. And throughout the years that I've known you, President Kagame, I've always seen how much you believe in young people. You know, whether it's investing in education or many of your own ministers in the cabinet, I've always been surprised at how young they are. The people who work in your personal office, very young people who are guiding you and working with you on a day-to-day basis, yourself personally as a leader. And even, investing in things like the Kigali Sports Arena to ensure that young people have access to sports. I remember attending a concert there once. I can't remember if it was Neo or Pato Ranking from Nigeria, and there was a big, thousands of young people who had gathered. But at some point, I couldn't tell who the star was because you came into the room and you went down to the floor, and everyone started, cheering. But it's very clear as well that young people really also enjoy the interactions with you. So I just really wanted to start with understanding why young people matter so much to you. Why do the young people of Rwanda especially matter so much to you? And then also, when you think about the African continent more broadly, what do you see as the potential of young people and also the challenges of young people in Africa?
Good. Thank you, Fred. At that time we met, not only was I enjoying the company of the young people, but also enjoying the music and the dancing. So, to your question, we all, when we are lucky and happy to be living, and we many times live in the moment, we make sense of that moment. But at the same time, there is more sense to be made based on that moment for the future. It's the moment, it's more so the future. And when you're talking about the future, you're talking about those who are going to be in that future or to actually build the future or live those moments of the future. And you necessarily talking about the young people of now. And that also means the life of a country. The country in the future is to be shaped by the very young people of today. So if the thinking goes like that, then that is the sense it makes to be thinking about the young people today, but more so thinking of them for the sake of the future. So that's my thinking. I guess it's the thinking of many people who see the value of the young people and the need to invest in them, and they know they're investing in the future when they're investing in the young people.
And just a follow-on question to that, Mr. President, why do you think that, when you go beyond Rwanda and you look at the whole continent, the average age of an African, as I mentioned, is 19. And do you believe that your fellow leaders on the continent and whether it's leaders in business and leaders in government, what more should we be doing to really open up opportunities for the young people of Africa?
Well, every leader, I guess, they do things differently, but for every leader or leaders of a country, there are many different levels. There are things you want to build that form a foundation on which generations will take turns building different things for themselves, for the country, for the population. So in Rwanda, that's where I'm used to things we do here. I'm a participant. We try to concentrate on investing in our young people, in technology on which they can build, or help them move forward, the infrastructure, the institutions that hold the population together. And so this, if you take just that as an example, I imagine that's what different societies, different countries try to do as well. And maybe sometimes we do things differently. People succeed and others not as well as the others have succeeded. And that is due to many reasons, so depending on the conditions in which different people operate. But I always hope that, again, as we started earlier, people's responsibilities don't get lost just in the moment, and they concentrate on that and stop thinking about the future. So leaders, therefore, what I know we are all supposed to be thinking about is about what we have, what we see, what we hear in the moment, but take it and project it so many years ahead. And you really can't do that without investing, as we have repeatedly said, in the young people and providing these opportunities we understand that shape them, and therefore they also help shape the future.
So for you, it's really about that long-term view, recognizing that young people are the future, and if you want to build a society that is stable and prosperous and that actually thrives in the long term, then you have to invest in young people.
There's no doubt about that.
Okay. Now, Your Excellency, here in the room, we talk a lot about doing hard things, and we challenge the members of the room who are very influential, very successful, to use their privilege to do hard things, because we believe that the only way they can justify their privilege is by not solving small problems and easy things, but by doing hard things to really change society and to create opportunities for others, like the young people that are in the room today. Now, you've done some incredibly hard things. You've transformed Rwanda into a fast-growing economy after a devastating genocide. Today, you've also led the reform of one of the most difficult institutions to reform, which is the African Union. And Rwanda is now one of the first countries on this continent that is going to be manufacturing its own vaccines. In fact, last week, Tuesday, I interviewed on this very show Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from the World Trade Organization, and she was, very passionate and complimentary about the work that you were doing to manufacture vaccines in Rwanda. So these are some of the most difficult things that one could choose to do. And yet you continue to choose to do hard things. Why do you do this time and time again? Do you choose to do some of these very difficult things?
Well, to begin with, those hard things must be done, first of all. Somebody has got to do the hard things. Why I would look at myself as one not to be among those doing the hard things, I wouldn't have a good reason, so I do that. But I also want to say, it's not just doing hard things. In fact, it starts with doing even simple things. Sometimes people take things to be so simple that they don't pay attention to them, yet cumulatively, they really add up to situations that will require you to do the hard things. So you can make the work of doing hard things much easier by paying attention to the simple, smaller things in time. So that the whole movement, I liked the way you called things here, the pathway. The pathway can be very difficult or can be simple, depending on how you paid attention to the simple, the easy, but also the hard things. So it's not just going for the hard things necessarily, but the hard things also have their time, especially like the example you just given. We reach there, and when we look back, at the moment of doing the hard things, you look back and say, well, we've lost time. If we had done a few things properly, the right way, 10 years ago, maybe these hard things would not be there today for us to, immerse ourselves and start doing them. They would be simpler because we would have laid the foundation, we would have put the infrastructure in place to deliver on them. Sometimes they become hard things just because they were not paid attention to in good time.
So what you're saying is that on the journey to doing hard things, the destination might be a very difficult thing to imagine, getting to that top of that mountain. But sometimes doing hard things requires doing simple things in the beginning, and it's accumulation of all those simple things. Like the Chinese say, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step.
Absolutely.
Taking those small steps. Can you give us an example of a simple thing that others may have taken for granted, but that you thought was important and that you saw as a key ingredient or as a step towards achieving a much, much more difficult thing?
Well, let me give you an example of city of Kagame, where it was 20 years ago and where it is now. Completely different worlds. So when you look at the city now, the infrastructure, the cleanliness, the traffic lights, everything almost in place. You would say, doing this thing was very hard, right? But the journey started 20 years ago. And starting with what you can do, just do it right. I remember having a discussion with the fellow cabinet members when this whole thing about keeping our environment clean and sustainable. And the beginning of the conversation was, do we need donors to give us money to keep our homesteads clean, to even ourselves as tidy and safe and healthy as we can? There are things we can do. We don't have to wait for somebody to come and hand us to us the means to do that, because we have the means within ourselves. So I said, why don't we do what we can at this moment? Why don't we just, pick the litter and put that in the right place where they belong in. And then with the time, as the economy grows and does fine, as the revenues grow and so on, and of course as donors, donate to us what they can and usually do, then we shall, from these means acquired, start investing in the things we weren't able to do because we had no means for that. So the simple things, therefore, that looks simple. I just, for a light moment, I will say, sometimes when that exercise started, I would be driving in the city. When I saw the litter around, plastic bags, paper thrown all over, I would literally, stop my car, convoy, and that tended to also stop the traffic. But the purpose would be I would get out with my escort guards who are paid to do different things and say, let's we would pick that litter. We would say, why would I pass and leave the
A whole
litter
president of a country picking up litter.
Exactly. So, but that has an effect. One, even starting with my entourage, they started thinking, we shouldn't leave this whole thing here. First of all, why do people go throwing litter around? And same time, the traffic that has come to a halt, because I think they would even start saying, what is this man up to? What's wrong with him? When they see me do that, they start thinking about it. They say, why would, as you said, why would the president stop and do this? And then next you say, maybe I should also not just pass by this and do that. So these are simple things. You don't need to pay a lot of money. You don't need to be paid a lot of money to do that, to just, this is a simple thing. But that in combination now with the investments that are to be made ahead now for the hard things to happen, you see, one thing leads to another, but they also are complementary. If you waited to go for the big thing and the hard thing, and then you leave these small things here and there without paying attention to them, then you probably miss the point, and in the end you don't arrive at the good results you want.
So you've touched on a few things. You're talking about the importance of leading by example, you getting out of the car yourself and picking up the litter. You're talking about self-reliance as well. Not waiting for donors to give you the funding so you can clean up the streets. Get going, and then that, also you talked about, you also touched on the what that does to the psyche, and then also in terms of the work ethic that it creates and the standards that you set to say that it's important enough to keep our streets clean. And therefore, this sets a high aspiration for the country, and then people then want to do more.
And it is important enough for the president to get out of the car and pick.
So if he can do it, you have no excuse to not do it yourself. Excellent. Now, Mr. President, you make a lot of unconventional decisions. For example, Rwanda was the first country, I think, in the world to allow blood delivery by drone with zipline. In the early stages, when you went after the genocide, when you were thinking about rebuilding the economy, you prioritized sectors that others would have thought, this is not the most important. You decide to invest in the environment, and you prioritize, conservation, tourism around the gorillas as one of the first things to do to really rebuild the economy. You built a national airline and created this world-class convention center at a time when most people couldn't imagine Rwanda as where they would go for, their conferences. And finally, today, Rwanda is the first African country to brand 2 football teams, Arsenal and Paris Saint-Germain. Again, people wouldn't think, why is an African country investing in branding European football teams? So when you make these decisions, I can imagine that they might not be popular, either in Rwanda and even around the world. What gives you the courage to make these decisions when others don't believe in what you're proposing? And how do you bring people along to achieve these great things?
Well, that is the most difficult question, perhaps, but also experience. And in most cases, there are things that have been talked about. You give, let's say, to young people, you give them an education, you give them advice, you do all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, there are things only these young people can give to themselves. You may give them everything you can give them. But there is that thinking in them. They have to undertake to say, what sense do I make with all this that I have acquired? I have acquired education, I'm healthy, I've been advised, to be a leader. You don't become a leader or you don't develop a vision by just going to school. No. Somehow you build on what you have acquired, and then there's something that only you can give to yourself. And that is, what do you do with what you have? So let me go to the bigger question you raised. For example, when we arrived here in 94, the population, half of the population, a big part of it dead, a bigger part of it displaced, others in the old problems they had anyway, because this has been a poor country and feeding on what is given to us and so on and so forth. That is the story. So when we took over in 94, with all this devastation, you are challenged to say, where do I start from? What do I do? You have no means, you have no people. Even the people you have, Everyone is just grieving and doesn't know where to start from, and everyone is, in the end, that's how actually people start blaming each other for their misery. It's like you think when you're having a problem, it's somebody else who caused it. And everybody thinks like that, and it goes around to the point that, but in a situation like that, you have to do some hard thinking. You talked about doing hard things. The hard thinking is, what do I do? How do I move on? Where do I start from? So you are challenged to think beyond what we are used to, because you might have, a textbook that tells you, to build an economy, to do this, you follow this path, you do this, you do that. It doesn't work in that time.
It's not in the textbook?
It just doesn't. Textbook is probably 10%. The rest is that hard thinking. And thinking out of the box. You no longer have to say, to achieve this. For example, we also had another big problem. We had cases in the hundreds of thousands of people who have killed their fellow Rwandans. Forget about whether anybody had justification or that. No, let's put even that aside. You already have people. And in that situation, you're going to necessarily have those who have lost and are aggrieved, the perpetrators, and then there is trying to settle it the way they can. If somebody lost a family and is thinking the other one is the one responsible, they will not wait for the textbook justice. They want to go for that one and actually sort it out for themselves and say, you killed my brother, I'll kill yours, or you killed my father, I'll kill yours, and so on and so forth. And on that scale, the things were here. There was no rational thinking to an extent. Everyone was just affected by what they have seen, what they have experienced, what has happened to them, and so on and so forth. To the extent you look around for the textbook that can give you a pathway from that point to move on, you won't find it. Therefore, it is that I was talking about. It is that is in everyone that they can look up to and say, what do I do in this moment? My personal experience. People made contributions with the different experiences, and it all came together to give us what we were later to achieve. But mine was, first, for example, I was leading an army that fought and secured the country in the end. But those fighters I was with, many of them had lost their parents, their relatives, they were left alone. And you imagine this person has been fighting for something to liberate their country and finds nothing about their family. Stopping that person to take it upon themselves to deal with the matter the way they understand it is difficult. It has to be outside of the textbook or the conventional thinking. But we had to do that. We had to say, look, what we have done is much bigger than ourselves who have secured our country. It's true and it makes sense, the way you are aggrieved, it's justified, and even what actions you can carry out may be actually justified in that sense. But if we allowed ourselves to be carried away and do that, which we think and which might be justified, what is going to be the end? It's just going to create a cycle of violence that will actually even consume the lives of those who are still living, all of us. So we've got to create a starting point, and the starting point is, let's try and live with our pain and manage it, and then create space for a movement forward, create stability, create a sense of security, and start building what we can build in terms of institutions, and then we can look back and start delivering what we were not able to deliver at the beginning. You know what developed, like in terms of justice, Gacaca and so on. Gacaca was just soul-searching, because you knew if you had to take hundreds of thousands of cases to court. Which courts? First of all, the courts weren't there. Even if they were there, anywhere, wherever they have working courts and a lot of capacity, even if you said, please come and help me try these cases, they would not manage. It would take hundreds of years to do that. But we can't wait for hundreds of years to live our lives of the moment. So we had to keep finding ways out of the conventional methods that we know, so that's really how we were more or less, other than even the fact that originally we set out to liberate our country. Therefore, we had a mission we understood very well, and we knew it had a lot of problems, but not as difficult or as many problems as we later on came to meet. So using that background and at the same time challenging ourselves to how we can deal with new situations that we cannot find examples of anywhere to address, and that we ourselves were the ones to deal with that. So that challenge that was, we were really pressure cooked. It's like we had to find a way of surviving that, and that delivered in many ways for us. It had to take some rational thinking to get out of that and apply different means that people may not be used to, whether ourselves or others who saw it from outside, but managed to come out like that. So I cannot say there is any magic that was here applied. It's what is possible with the people. We did what is possible. If, as human beings, our story tells two parts, really. One part about human beings is how destructive, even self-destructive we can be. But on the other side, part of our story, which is one we are living today and interesting, is also how human beings can reach within themselves to do the very things that in the end may look like a miracle. So it's all human beings. It's all within us, and it depends on, this is why I'm saying you probably don't go to school anywhere for it, but we have it within us. And where we go to school and the education we get, of course, can be helpful. it informs you more, better, but there is that part that only we and others can do for themselves.
So you again, coming back to that point about self-reliance, and there's certain things that you really can't be taught how to do. So you touched on two things that I thought important. One is the importance of really learning by doing, right? Because one of the things that we share with our young leaders at African Leadership Academy and African Leadership University, that to effectively develop yourself as a leader, only 10% of the skills can be learned in the classroom. 20% comes from developmental relationships with your mentors and peers and coaches, and 70% comes from experience. You learn by doing. You have to try things and fail and keep going. So as important as it is to get education, you're not going to be able to solve. Perhaps more important is to learn how to become a problem solver. And then with those problem-solving skills, when you meet new problems that you haven't identified before in the textbook, you can then solve them. And that's one of the things we really try and embed in our students, is to enable them to become problem solvers, not simply people who have memorized facts and figures. The other thing that you talked about was something that I always personally believe in, is about how constraints drives innovation. And you were faced with a lot of constraints. As you mentioned, it would have taken a century to take people through the normal court system after the genocide. So you had to think about a different way. You didn't have many resources to develop the country, so you had to think a different way. And so, in theory, Africa, therefore, should be the most innovative continent in the world, because we have a lot of constraints, and it forces you to reimagine and to rethink. You can't do things a conventional way when you have all these constraints. You have to reimagine and reinvent.
Absolutely.
And that's what you've done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my last question before we take a break.
So in other words, just a small thing before we leave that, to add what you say. The young people here, one thing you can learn, as a person, first, before you go to another for help, make sure you have challenged yourself enough as to how much you can do
for yourself.
For yourself. Then, after that, you can reach out to a friend and say, but if you do it the other way around, it doesn't work well. If every time it's a problem, Fred, help me, that's a big problem. But I will definitely come. But I will definitely come to Fred when I have really tried and convinced myself that probably I need help. Then it's right. It's okay to go for help. Mm-hmm. Yes.
People help those who help themselves.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So get started. I hope you're listening, young people in the room. So my last question before we go for a break. Here in the room, we're an African organization, but we have global plans. And the reason we're building a global network is because we believe that it's important for these African talent that we're developing to be able to access global capital when they start their businesses, and to be able to access global markets, if they're trying to export and so forth. And also one thing that COVID has made possible is that now it's possible to work globally without the brain drain. You can be sitting in Rwanda as a software engineer working for Siemens in Germany. You can be a designer in Nigeria working for Zara in Spain. And today, COVID has actually made companies a lot more open to hiring talent around the world. So we thought that we need to build a global platform and let the world know that we have top talent in that platform. And that allows us to export African talent, but without the brain drain, and to really create opportunities for young people on a global scale. Now, I've seen you engage a lot on the global stage as well. I remember in 2019, when we still used to travel, I went to San Francisco, and I went to the headquarters of Facebook. And they said, oh, President Kagame was here last week. And then I flew to New York, and I met up with a friend and an investor, Matt Harris. I think you know him. And he said, "Oh, I just hosted President Kagame for a dinner." And we've met several times at the Milken Summit in Los Angeles and so forth. So you clearly engage globally, but yet you're proudly African. So why is it so important for you to engage on the global stage, and how have you leveraged those global relationships to drive Rwanda's progress and development?
By the way, I should have done that earlier. I have done it before anyway. Let me thank you for, Fred, thank you for being the idea behind this African Leadership University. It's really Pan-African. And it also gives us pride to be one of the hosts of the
and thank you for
African
your support.
Leadership University. So, you see, there is a lot of work to do here in Africa. But it's always going to serve us well if we move not only in the right direction, but move properly, in the right manner. The right manner, I mean, is there are things we need to address here in Africa ourselves. We have the talent, the young people, the numbers speak for themselves. In comparison, you say Italia with the rest of the world. So we have to be organized. We need to get organized. How do we, therefore, if we have the talent, if we have the young people, such a huge population, how do we get them organized in order to, for them, gain from the opportunities available and develop, but also maximize on that talent pool and how we can tap into it ourselves for the African benefit. But then from there, now, it's not just start with Africa and end with Africa. Africa is part of the world. There are things other parts of the world have that we need, either because we don't have them, or not even, or because we need them to develop ourselves to the levels where others are. So, therefore, how we get linked to the rest of the world is important. And that's how what you referred to has been happening. Not only am I trying to contribute to having the Rwandan talent pool, the African talent pool, develop with what we have, what we can put in place at that moment, or what is available to us. But immediately I have to think about how do we connect this to the outside world, because we need the outside world for different things that are very vital to our own progress. And that's how exactly what you said has been happening. It's talent, other talents that exist that you connect with. It's capital that we need, that we have to link up with. It's technology that we need, and so that there is that link between Africa, Rwanda, and the rest of the world, and then that will speed up our own progress. That's really what I have in mind.